Hey, and welcome back to the Art of a Life Well Lived. I am Christine Regan Lake, and it's good to be back here again, and it's good to have you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, today I want to talk to you about the signs that you may be living in survival mode. I want to talk also about what is most important to understand about how dangerous it is to live in survival mode, how detrimental it is to the body. So, okay, let's get started. So, when you live in survival mode, typically people who end up later in life in relationships where they are constantly walking on eggshells, a lot of times the reason that happens is because when they were growing up, they grew up in an environment that was highly chaotic. Their parents fought a lot, there was lots of chaos, and so their body became attenuated to the fact that life is chaotic, stressful, things like that. So that is what their nervous system became attenuated to. Now, the problem is that if you've been in survival mode for a long period of time, it can have detrimental physical effects on the body. Three of the most important things that you need to understand about the physical damage that happens to your body when you are experiencing long-term narcissistic abuse or in a toxic situation, job, marriage, relationship, in which you are constantly on hyper vigilant alert, always wondering if you're going to trigger that person, always wondering, what's going to happen next, walking on eggshells. One, it causes brain damage, and I actually have a video. If you want to go through my menu, I have a video specifically covering brain damage that occurs from narcissistic abuse. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it right now, but just know that long-term narcissistic abuse will trigger massive amounts of cortisol. When you have excess levels of cortisol in the brain, it will cause damage and impair the amygdala and the hippocampus. So watch that video on brain damage. So if you want the more granular detail about that stuff. The second thing that you need to know is that when you have excess levels of cortisol, you will get adrenal burnout, adrenal fatigue, adrenal burnout, which basically means that your adrenals, when you are in a perpetual state of living in survival mode, walking on eggshells, your adrenals are constantly working 24/7. They never get a break, and so they get burned out. What this can do is, when you get that burnout, now you're going to have thyroid issues, you're going to have metabolism issues, you could potentially be gaining weight. In terms of the burnout, it'll affect your sleep, because when you have adrenal burnout, what it'll do is it reverses your cortisol release cycle. So what happens is, in the morning when you're supposed to have the most amount of energy, your cortisol is going to be low, and you're going to find that your cortisol spikes just before you go to bed. So it completely messes with your circadian rhythm when you have been in a long-term situation in which you are in a perpetual state of hypervigilance, fight or flight, walking on eggshells, survival mode. So that's going to burn out your adrenals. So it can cause brain damage, it can cause adrenal fatigue. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to weaken your immune system. It is a known fact. The Gottman Research Institute discovered that individuals who are in a narcissistic relationship, when they are on the receiving end of contemptual communication, where they are spoken down to as if they are less than, that will specifically cause autoimmune diseases. So staying in an unhealthy relationship has detrimental physical effects when you are in a hypervigilant state, always walking on eggshells in survival mode. It causes brain damage. It will give you adrenal burnout, and it'll give you autoimmune issues. Okay, so now let me go into what I was going to want to talk about with respect to the signs. So what are some of the signs that you are living in survival mode? So typically someone who is in that kind of survival mode, they're just thriving, they're not like thriving and joyful and living their best life. They're not conscious. Really, you are living in autopilot mode. It's just basically just functioning. You're on that treadmill life. You're repeating the same patterns over and over and over. And typically your emotional exchanges with people are going to be based on triggered reactions, because you're not present. You're kind of in that hypervigilant state. When you are present, then you can actually respond to situations. But when you are not present, when you're stressing about the future, or you have anxiety about the future, or you're, rolling through emotions of anger, rage, and resentment about the past, you will respond to scenarios in your environment by habitual reactions instead of conscious choices. So if you want to move from survival to healthy and thriving, you want to get out of autopilot mode, stop repeating old patterns and habitual reactions, and you want to become more present, you want to become more conscious, be aware of the patterns the negative patterns that you've been living in the past, and learn to start objectively responding. Where something happens, you pause, you take a breath, you witness what is going on in your head in terms of observing how you're being triggered, and acknowledge that this is a trigger, and then make a conscious decision to respond healthfully instead of reacting in an automated, autopilot, survival instinct situation. The second one is that when you're in survival mode, your nervous system is in a chronic state of dysregulation, which is what we talked about, right? Where you're hypervigilant, your fight or flight is triggered on, it's burning out your adrenals because you've got all that cortisol and adrenaline racing through your bodies. And I can tell you from my own experience that me personally, my fight or flight switch had been turned on like perpetually 24/7. I had toxic levels of adrenaline and cortisol through my lymph system. My lymph system couldn't flush it out quickly enough. It had gotten into my pituitary gland, was screwing up my hormones. So it is a very, very big deal, this adrenaline and cortisol. So it's super important for you to be able to turn off that fight or flight. How can you turn off the fight or flight? Get out in nature, go for a walk in nature. You could sit in a near infrared sauna, which is what I do. I love it. The near infrared sauna will penetrate 3 to 4 inches into the body, and it will switch off the sympathetic nervous system and help your body to learn to relax and allow your body to go into rest and digest. If you're in 24/7 release of cortisol, adrenaline, because you've been in that hyper state of survival mode for a long time, your digestion is more than likely screwed up, because when you are producing adrenaline and cortisol 24/7, when you are in that situation where it never turns off, your body doesn't have rest and digest, which is when the colon works to move things through your colon, so you end up having digestive issues and constipation and stuff. So if you want to, how do you get out? How do you go from survival mode to healing and healthy living, thriving? You want to learn to regulate your nervous system, turn off the fight or flight. Like I said, get back in nature, go for a walk, near infrared sauna, meditation, yoga, calming effects, anything that has a meditative state that's going to calm down the body physically and soothe your nervous system. So the next thing is, when you're in survival mode, you are really coming from a fear-based, defensive, competitive mindset. You're constantly on, like, you have that hyper vigilant state of kind of scanning the environment for what's wrong, what's broken, who's coming at me, who's attacking me. You're hyper defensive, hypercritical, things like that. When you can shift that focus, when you can turn off the sympathetic nervous system and you can get present, you get more into a community-based mindset that's more collaborative, that's working together, that doesn't look at everybody as your competition. It's how do we come together, join hands, and rise together, as opposed to looking at everybody out there as your competition. Another element of survival mode is that people who have come from traumatic environments in their childhood, that you are more than likely carrying around with you in your cellular memory, in your DNA. You have generational trauma, because this experience that you had in your childhood is not the first time, right? It was, it's been done generation over generation over generation. So you want to do, how do you do that? How do you clear that? Energy work. You want to do energy work, and I have videos about generational trauma and understanding, like, family curses. You can look that up as well in my menu of videos. So you want to do energy work to release and clear any generational trauma that's in your cellular memory and your DNA. So doing that presence work, doing energy work to clear the body, to release that from your body and your nervous system. And the beautiful thing is, this is the amazing thing about doing healing work, When you clear it from your body, you clear it for future generations. So as you clear it from your body, you're actually clearing it directly out of your children's body as well, because we are linked. And when the parent cleans up and clears the negative trauma in their body, it automatically, because of, I won't go into it now, but there was an experiment they did where they separated a single cell and put them on two different sides of the country, and when you impacted one, the other was impacted. Your children are of you. They come from your cells, from your DNA. So when you clean up your emotional body, you're actually cleaning up your children's body. And one of the things that I always say as an impetus for encouraging people to do their work is that every wound that you refuse to heal, you strap to the back of your child, because your children have inherited your generational trauma. But if you take responsibility for it, you clear it, you're clearing it for yourself and for your children and the future of your lineage. Okay, so the next one is survival mode. So people typically who've grown up in traumatic environments where they were constantly in survival mode, more than likely they will struggle with relationships because they will be constantly worried about abandonment wounds, being left and whatever. So what you want to do is, if you're in that survival mode and you find that you're unable to have healthy relationships because you're constantly, in that stress and worry about whether the relationship's going to end and you have abandonment issues, you really need to heal and recover and focus on the emotional healing work that you need to do to heal those abandonment wounds that you have from your childhood. Understanding your attachment style. I have some videos on attachment style. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch those videos. So it's really about moving from survival mode to healing. You want to address those wounds that have caused those abandonment issues that you may have, so that you can embrace a healthier way of living, and so that you can start co-creating healthy relationships that are based on love, respect, kindness, where you can respond in the present moment from a place of love, respect, and compassion, as opposed to being in an unhealthy, toxic relationship where you respond in habitual, automated, treadmill-like responses that are clearly just triggered reactions that don't serve anybody. So those are some of the signs and symptoms. Again, I'll say it again. It's living on autopilot, repeating patterns and habitual reactions, as opposed to being conscious and present about how you want to respond to a situation. You have chronic nervous system dysregulation, which basically means you're in a perpetual state of walking on eggshells. Hypervigilance, never, always like fear, worry, and anxiety are like the emotional states that you live in 24/7. You're fear-based and competitive, always looking at the outside world as everyone's your competitor instead of working from a place of collaboration. You have unresolved generational trauma where, the family secrets, nobody talks about what's toxic, nobody talks about what's going on in the family, the trauma, the generational dysfunction. It's a perpetual state of denial. And you struggle with relationships in terms of having fear of abandonment issues. So those are some of the signs and symptoms that you may be struggling with living in survival mode. But please remember that when you are living in a perpetual state of survival mode, for whatever reason, whether it's because of a financial situation, or whether it's because you're in a toxic relationship with somebody who is being emotionally destructive to you, who's harmful, a bully, a narcissist, whatever, when you are in survival mode, you are doing incredible harm to your physical body. Survival mode was only meant to be experienced for short periods of time, to run away from the tiger, when you were, in the woods. And so it's not meant to be a state of being in which you live for long term. And when you do, it causes brain damage, adrenal burnout, digestive issues, autoimmune problems, hormonal issues, a whole host of things. So it is highly destructive, and you cannot heal in the same environment in which you got sick. If you are living with someone that keeps you in a perpetual state of fear, worry, and anxiety, where you're always having to worry about triggering them and things like that, or you're working in a toxic environment with a boss who's highly volatile, things like that, you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. So you must get to a place that will allow you to have a nest that is safe so that you can turn off your sympathetic nervous system. And if you have to figure out a transition strategy to get out of a job, then start putting that resume together. But know that you cannot heal in the same environment in which you got sick. It's not possible, because you need a safe environment to heal. So I hope you found value in that. It was definitely my pleasure to share that with you. If you have any questions regarding survival mode or any of the things that I discussed in this video, please put it in the comments. I would love to connect with you and answer any questions that you might have. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.